going to finish off with some basic SVG animations. I've kept it really simple because you can do some crazy things, but it's a bit hard to explain in about 15 minutes. But you can take the things I'm going to show you and do highly complicated things, put them all together, use your imagination. I'm sure you guys will be able to come up with something. Before I get started in showing you the demos, I just wanted to quickly go through using animations specifically. So we've gone through transitions. I'm going to talk about the animation syntax because that's what I've used in all of my demos, and it's a little bit different. So to do an animation, you need two things. First, you need the animation property and its associated values, which are these. And then you need the keyframes. Now, the keyframes I will show you in the demo because it's a little bit easy to explain. But the keyframe is where you get the animation name from, which I'll show you. The other options you have, and these are, not all of them are required, so you can sort of mix and match them. Timing functions, exactly the same as transitions, so we've already been through those. Linear, ease, fancy custom one. So they work exactly the same. You can play around with them as much as you like. Then you've got the duration and the delay. The duration is how long you want the animation to run for once, so from start to finish. If you loop the animation, that number is how long each loop runs. And the delay is how long before the animation starts the first time. So if you have the animation start on page load and you have a 4-second delay, it'll wait 4 seconds, then run the animation. If you loop the animation, that delay won't be repeated. The delay only happens the first time. If you want a delay in your loop, you actually have to put it in your keyframes and extend the length of the duration. It's a bit of a pain. I don't know why they didn't include it in the loop, but such is life. This takes milliseconds or second values. The next option is duration count. This can be infinite as a keyword, or you can specify a number. If you don't specify a number, I'm pretty sure it just runs once. I usually do infinite or once. Then this one, fill mode, is actually what we're going to use to animate a line in and do some kind of drawing. It actually has a few values you can put in. The first one is none. I don't really know what you'd use that for, maybe like resetting the animation with JavaScript or something if you want to turn it off. I've never used it, but I'm sure there's a use case. Then there's forwards, which probably the most useful of all of the values. What that does is it takes the last frame in the animation and sets the object to look like that. So if you want to animate something in and leave it there, you would use forwards. Backwards is when it animates to the end and then it resets the object to look like what it was before the animation started. So outside of the animation keyframes. So if you have a blue circle and then your animation keyframe is red at the beginning and it animates to green, at the end, backwards will set the object to blue, not to red. So it's what it is outside of the animation. And then the last one is both. So it's kind of weird, but it combines forwards and backwards and determines what it'll look like based on that. And the last one is direction. Direction will determine how the animation runs. So the default is basically from start to finish. Then there's reverse, which is the end back to the start. And then there's alternate, which will run start, finish, finish, start. This one, alternate, I actually use in my demos, so we'll get to see that. First thing I'm going to show you is animating the stroke of an SVG, which I'm going to sit down now because it'll make it a little bit easier. It's pretty straightforward. There are 3 things that you need to do. First, you set the dash length, then you define the offset, and then you have to animate the offset. I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful masterpiece. I'll quickly show you the HTML because it's really easy. This is literally all I have in the page. and all I did to it, aside from exporting it from Illustrator, was run it through an optimizer, which there's a link to that in my reading list at the end. Highly recommend you do that before you start. And then I just added this class of line. That's it, straight from Illustrator. So these top ones we don't really need. We'll focus on this. So with SVGs, you can define a few things. Fill, I set to none, so it would be transparent in the middle. I've got a 2 pixel stroke width, and my stroke is actually white by default. So if I turn that animation off, there's that beautiful unanimated star. So in order to get the line to actually animate around like that, you have to first define the dash offset. The dash offset is basically how long the line is. So from here all the way around to here. I just guessed this number, so it is 420. But you can use JavaScript if you've got really complicated illustrations to work it out. And if you are doing something complicated, I recommend you do, because it can take a while to figure out how long that line is. And then the second thing you have to define is this dash array. The dash array takes heaps of numbers. I've said 15 and 8, and what that does is say I want a 15 dash and an 8 space. If you put just one number in, like just 15, it'll go 15 dash 15 space. If you put 3 numbers in, it'll repeat the 3 numbers to be even. I liked the different sizing because I thought it looked cool when it animated. So we'll put that back on. So my animation is really basic. The first thing I define is the name, which is dashed, which I'll show you in a sec. It's got a 4-second duration. It's a linear timing function, and it runs infinitely, which is why it's constantly going around. So this is the keyframes. Keep in mind you do actually need prefixing on this if you don't use an auto prefixer, which CodePen does, thankfully. But this is the sort of standard way to define it. You can say, if you're only doing 0 and 100, you can say to to from and take keywords in instead of doing percentages, but because I wanted to change the stroke colour, I've got multiple in here. Basically all I'm doing is animating the dash offset from 0 round to 420, and that's what makes the lines move. If I just turn the rotate off, you'll see it's just going around, which is a bit trippy if you look at it for really long. And that's pretty much how you animate a stroke. I thought a rotate looked pretty sweet. Again, 0 to 360. You can put all sorts of things on there. I'll show you a bit of a scale later. There is a little bit of an issue with transforms on SVGs, which I'll go through a bit later on. The next one I wanted to show you, which I'm sure everybody always wants to do, is drawing in a line. CSS Conf had this on their website, very cool. I have actually written my name out, but it wasn't quite as nice as my star, so maybe another time. The only difference between this and the previous one is that our dash array is 420, which is the same length as the dash offset. And the reason for this, I'm sure you've figured, is that when you're defining your dash array as 420, you have a 420 line, then a 420 space. So when you animate it in, which is down here, you're basically saying my dash offset's starting at 420, and I'm animating it back to 0, which moves the line back in so it looks like it's it looks like it's drawing in. Now, just so it would go backwards and forwards, I chucked alternate in here. If I take that out and write forwards, which was one of the other fill modes, it will draw in, and it should stay, but it, oh no, sorry, I didn't take infinite off. It's a gotcha. Don't leave infinite on, otherwise it will continuously loop. There we go, purple star. not as fun in my opinion, but anyway. Now before I show you the last one, I'll show you first because that's the fun part. We'll do the fun bit before we get into the disappointing parts. Trippy. So all I'm doing on this one is scaling and rotating. So it starts off at a scale of 1 and ends up at 1.9, and I chucked an ease in out on it just so it looked like it was sort of going woo. Now, sadly, there is a problem with this, which I'm a bit sad to talk about, to be honest, but this doesn't really work in all of the browsers. If you're using Chrome, you're sweet. It's going to look awesome. If you've got IE or Opera, you get nothing. It's just going to stay there. Firefox just goes. I don't really know. Maybe that's what you want. And Safari, when you zoom in, you lose the sync. The problem here is that Firefox doesn't respect percentage-based origins, which I'll go back to the demo and show you what that is, and it doesn't respect keyword origins as well. So like if you said you want your transform origin to be top left, Firefox doesn't know what to do with that. And it's the same with Safari. It doesn't respect the percentage-based origins. The only way to get it to work in Firefox is to use a pixel-based origin. I actually defined the origin somewhere here. So if I take that off, it starts rotating. The reason that it disappears is because the SVG has got a view box on it, so it goes outside of the frame. But essentially what that's doing is changing the point at which the object rotates. So if I chuck this back in, just get rid of the scale for a second. This is now rotating at 100 pixel by 100 pixel origin. I don't actually know what this is going to do. There we go. So that's defining a pixel value. That might work for you, but if you're trying to do something responsively and you've got like big assets, it doesn't really work. It's a bit annoying, but these are the problems. Now the way to get around it, don't use CSS to rotate and do transforms. You can use a JavaScript library like Snap, or there's one by GreenSock as well called GSAP, I think, and that'll let you animate everything. And the reason for that is it uses pixel-based values, but it works it out with JavaScript. I won't go through doing that because that's like a whole other talk, but that's your option. Or you can use Smil. I don't know if you guys have used this, it's kind of old. It's an old spec and there's a whole bunch of SVG extensions in it. There is an article written by Sarah Swayden for CSS Tricks at the end of my reading list if you want to have a look at that. Have to go back to using JavaScript, unfortunately. The last thing I'm going to show you guys, I don't know if you've seen this, but you know that Gooey Effect where like objects goop together? I'm going to show you how to do that with SVG.
That book.
What? Oh, you noticed? There's someone every slide. Wondered if anyone would notice. Yeah. Well done. I should have got a prize for you. I'll get you a prize. Oh look, here you go. Mandarin. There you go. Mandarin. Yeah. Not planned, spur of the moment. So this is actually really, really easy. When I looked at this, I thought it would be really hard, but it's not. It's super easy to do. The first thing you have to do is blur the graphics together. Then you increase the contrast of the alpha channel, and then you place the original graphic over the new one. The reason you have to do this step is if you've got text or icons or something inside the assets, these will end up being blurred as a result of the first one. So let me take you through that. Whoops, wrong order. Oh, it's not come up. Hang on.
How dare it?
It's alright. Here's one I prepared earlier. Now I'll just quickly show you the HTML for this. Yeah, it's pretty cool, huh? Now this is the HTML for it. It's not actually an SVG. The SVG is a filter. So I've got my big ball and my little ball here. And then I've got my little baffled face in there, just to show you the blur. So I'll bring the CSS back up and show you that first. Really, you can style these however you want. All of this is not important. The only important thing here is this. And what you're saying is you want your filter to be the goo filter, which is this right up here. And the other thing that I've got, which obviously uses an animation, is just a keyframe to bounce it around. And I use the translate X and Y at different keyframes to do that, just so you can see him going goopy. We don't need that anymore. Let's go back to the HTML. Let's cut off a bit at the bottom there. Anyway, so what I'm going to do to show you this so you can see how it's set up is just turn these off. So that blurred out my little face. So this is step one, blur the two assets. And what this does is you've applied in your CSS that you want the balls to have this filter applied. So it takes that as an in, as the source graphic, and the result is a blur, and the blur is a 10. This is the amount of blur that you want. So what that does is it gives us the blur. We then want to pass that in to the color matrix. Whoops. Gotta get that just right. CSS comments. HTML comments. What am I saying? What the matrix here does is get rid of the sort of fluffy edges. So it takes our result of blur and you pass that in here, specified matrix. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I fully understand how the matrix works because that would be a lie. It is actually the RGB and alpha channels, and it creates like a grid, and then you basically play with the numbers. This is what we need, I can assure you. You could probably use that for most of them, and that's what increases the contrast of the alpha channel. And then that gives us the result of goo. And then all we do to get our little face, which you can see here is no longer existent because he's blurred out, is take our goo result here and our source graphic, which were our original divs essentially, and then we sit the source graphic above the result of goo. And that's it. That's all you need to do to make a gooey effect. Obviously, you can get heaps more complicated with it. I'm sure you've seen some of the ones where like the things wobble and everything. But if you want to do something really basic, this is how you do it. It's pretty straightforward. I'd go forth and goo all the things. So that's it, everybody. Just quickly before I finish up, I will send round a link with all the slides, the videos which the guys have kindly filmed for us. If you want to follow us on Twitter, Fenders Perth, this is me. Now, if it confuses you, my name is actually Mandy Michael, but this was my maiden name, just to make make it difficult. And obviously you can find me dressed as Batgirl anywhere. Please come along to our next meetup. The next one I believe is the Git workshop, and then the month after that we've got coding for accessibility, which Julie Grundy will be doing for us, and that will actually be coding techniques. So if you want to get into accessibility, and you should, that'll be a great one to come along to. If you know of anywhere that has a bigger boardroom, please let me know. That's it. Thanks everybody. Feel free to hang around.